This is Kat Klingensmith with Retro Crime. It wouldn't be the holidays without drama, right? The holidays, people drink, there's always something. But I don't think any of us have known any as bad as Annie Harris and Chessie Tomlin. They really made this a special day. This crime takes place in Pittsburgh despite my efforts to find a seasonal crime outside of my own city. We have a strict policy over at Retro Crime of seeing the places related to our investigations. We travel a lot. We're going away again in December, and that will start the next season. That's something to look forward to. We will be going away again in January and again in February. We want to get to know where these people are from, what it's like, what their life was like back then, see anything that is from the time that they were there, and to see the spots where it happened. It's easiest in Pittsburgh, right? Because I'm here, but also because Pittsburgh just happens to have an exceptional amount of weird crime. I think it might be the mafia history. It might be that the city was so polluted, it made people nuts. In any case, in 1935, Annie Harris celebrated Thanksgiving with her best friend and neighbor, Chessie Tomlin. Annie was in her mid-20s and Chessie was in her mid-30s. Both were married and separated from their husbands. Chessie had a teenage son, but her other 3 kids died in infancy of measles, the flu, and colitis. Infant death was very common back then, especially among women financially disadvantaged. Annie may have had children. If I found the right person, and I probably did, her son grew up in an orphanage. In these old crimes, we will find a lot of things repeating. We will see alcoholism, we will see personality disorders, we will see a lot of childhood neglect. There will be grief, poverty, adultery, teenage brides, dysfunctional families, and churchgoers, hence the very young brides. Alcoholics Anonymous wasn't popular yet. Mothers who drank to oblivion lost their families, while fathers who drank to oblivion beat their wives and children. That's why feminists pushed for prohibition. It was to save the lives of women and children during a time when the law wasn't on their side. Too many men spent their money on alcohol instead of feeding their families, and then they came home drunk and violent. Child abuse and domestic violence were considered family matters. Neighbors knew, but they minded their own business. What could they do? The police wouldn't get involved until someone wound up dead. In some places, that's still the case. Chessie, she was making ends meet by renting a room to an older gentleman named Riley and his wife, Mary. Annie, she lived in the adjoining duplex, and they were newly single. When the holidays came around, Chessie made a traditional Thanksgiving Day feast and invited Annie over. That's obviously too much food for 4 people, so I'm guessing their estranged husbands were invited too. While in the kitchen preparing the meal, both women got wildly drunk. This led to both of them trying to seduce 40-something Riley. They became competitive and began fighting to the point that it escalated with them beating each other with hammers. Why were there hammers in the kitchen? I'm guessing they were in the middle of making the mashed potatoes. After the wailing continued, Annie suddenly left, ran home, and returned. She brought a knife to a hammer fight. The knife won, of course. Chessie fell over. When her husband Joe came over for turkey, he found her on the floor, barely alive, bleeding out. Next door, Annie's husband James came over, and she told him that Chessie attacked her with a hammer, so she stabbed her in self-defense. Clearly, this wasn't true, as she had deliberately stopped the fight to go home and return with a knife. James knew his ex-wife, and he was no dummy. He went to the police, who came and found Annie a block away in an alley trying to hide. They arrested her, and she gave the press no motive for why she did what she did. Riley's account was that he was sleeping through the whole thing. Since his shirt was still torn when the police found him, they were skeptical, and he confessed that he tried to get between them to protect his wife. I doubt that. I think they tore his shirt fighting over him. So here's the scene. A room of married people. Despite a man being there with his wife, a couple of belligerent women fought so hard for him that they grabbed hammers and pounded each other. They were separated from their husbands, but their husbands were still involved in their lives. Just from this scenario, it sounds like the wives are drinkers, selfish, and unconcerned with anyone's marriage, hence more of the stereotypes we're going to see in these crimes. We're going to see, of course, adultery, as I said. We're going to see alcoholism. Annie finally gave a reason for her crime during the trial. She said that she drank so much that she thought Chessie was the turkey, so she tried to carve her. Annie was found guilty and sentenced to 2 years in the workhouse. She was released, her husband died, and after that she reconciled with her kids. I would love to give more information about everyone's personal lives so that we could find empathy somewhere. Instead, to me, it sounds like just a funny story because I can't find out enough about them. A wall I am up against is the racism in the media. Everyone in the story was Black and low income. While this crime was outrageous enough to be mentioned in a few papers, it didn't get nearly as much attention as it would if everyone had been white. There were none of the standard details about them like in other sensational crimes. No mentioning where they grew up or how attractive they were. Something that always bothers me about reading the old stories is that it has to tell us how attractive the women are in them and what her size is. There's no mention of their jobs or anything that they do. Sometimes they mention that they're churchgoers, and that's it, because they always are. The reporters were white, so they were more likely to try to humanize people who look like them. It wasn't just the reporters. Things like death certificates for African Americans didn't get as much information because instead of finding out who the person's parents were, whoever was filling them out often wrote, "Don't know," arrest the family, and carelessly wrote the name wrong. These were done by white people who also didn't feel a connection with them. There was a time I impressed myself. My husband's coworker asked his boss for reparations for Juneteenth. His boss said that if he could prove he's descended from a slave, he'll pay him. I happened to be there at the time, overheard this, and his boss knows nothing about me, probably knows nothing about this podcast, so I asked the man a few questions. His dad was adopted, so he didn't know his original last name, and he didn't know their ages. It wasn't much to work with. Nevertheless, it took me all night, but I did find the customs form from the West Indies when one of his direct ancestors arrived in this country. I also found out that his coworker was living with his mother and that his mother had been lying to him her whole life about her age. Also, his mother's side was inbred. He showed this to his boss, who said, "All right, you can have all of the cash that's in my pocket." It was $3. And then he said, "Okay, you can go home early." Have a great Thanksgiving. And in the meantime, I will be looking for some scandalous Christmas-related crimes.